August 17, 1945. Kashiwa Airfield, Japan. The war had been over for 2 days, but the smell of burnt aviation fuel still hung in the morning air like a funeral shroud. Captain James Holloway stepped off the C-47 transport onto Japanese soil, his boots crunching against gravel still warm from recent fires. Behind him, 3 technical intelligence officers clutched leather briefcases filled with photographs and salvage lists. They had come hunting for secrets. Operation Lusty had already stripped Germany bare. The Messerschmitt Me-262 Jeks, the rocket-powered Comet interceptors, even the flying wing prototypes, all cataloged, crated, shipped to Wright Field for American eyes to dissect and understand. But Tokyo had surrendered before anyone could properly inventory what the Japanese had been building in their final desperate months, and the rumors coming from naval intelligence were impossible to ignore. A fighter that flew backwards. Holloway had laughed when he first read the report. Combat fatigue, he'd assumed, pilots seeing things in the chaos of dogfights. But the photograph that arrived 3 days later had silenced every joke in the briefing room. The image was grainy, shot from a distance, but the silhouette was unmistakable. A propeller mounted behind the cockpit, wings swept forward like a bird frozen mid-dive, the whole machine looking like someone had assembled an aircraft from the tail forward. The Kyushu J7W Shinden, lightning magnificent. They found it in Hangar 7, hidden beneath camouflage netting and wooden crates marked with false inventory numbers. The guards were gone. The base commander had fled, but the aircraft remained, sitting in shadow like a relic from a war that hadn't happened yet. Holloway approached slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dust. The canard forewing sat low near the nose, giving the aircraft a predatory crouch. The main wings swept forward at an aggressive angle, their leading edges sharp as knives. And mounted at the rear, behind the cockpit and fuselage, sat a 6-bladed propeller driven by a Mitsubishi Mk9D 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,130 horsepower. Everything about it defied logic. Lieutenant Kowalski, the propulsion specialist, circled the aircraft twice before speaking. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "They put the engine in the back. Christ, Jim, they put the entire engine in the back." Holloway ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cold despite the August heat. Rivets lined seams in perfect rows, each one placed with the precision of a watchmaker. This wasn't some desperate rush job cobbled together in the final weeks. This was years of research, testing, refinement. The cockpit canopy was already open. Holloway climbed onto the wing and peered inside. The instrument panel stared back. Airspeed indicator, altimeter, fuel gauge, all marked in Japanese characters he couldn't read. But the layout was familiar enough. Stick and rudder, throttle on the left, gun triggers on the control column, 4 30mm Type 5 cannons mounted in the nose, enough firepower to tear a B-29 Super Fortress apart in a single pass. He imagined the pilot who would have flown this. Young, probably, trained on conventional fighters, then asked to master something that handled like nothing else in the sky. Forward-swept wings meant different aerodynamics, different stall characteristics. One mistake at high speed and those wings would twist apart like paper in a storm. "How many did they build?" Kowalski called from below. Holloway checked his briefing notes. 2 prototypes. This is the only one that flew. Made its first flight 3 weeks before surrender. 3 flights total, less than an hour of total flight time. And the pilot? Tsuruno. Captain Tsuruno Susumu, Navy test pilot. Disappeared the day after the Emperor's radio broadcast. The word disappeared hung in the air like smoke. Holloway had seen enough in the Pacific to know what that meant. How many Japanese pilots had flown their last missions into the sea rather than surrender? How many engineers had burned their blueprints, destroyed their prototypes, erased years of work rather than let the enemy understand? But this aircraft survived. Someone hid it, protected it. Holloway climbed down and walked to the rear of the aircraft where the massive propeller blades caught the dim light filtering through the hangar doors. Each blade was longer than his arm, carved from laminated wood and metal, balanced to rotate at 2,500 revolutions per minute. The pusher configuration meant cleaner airflow over the wings, better visibility for the pilot, and concentrated firepower in the nose without needing to synchronize guns through a spinning propeller arc. It was brilliant. It was insane. It was both. We need to document everything. Measurements, photographs, engine specifications, everything. Then we create it and ship it to Naval Air Station Patuxent River for evaluation. Kowalski nodded, already sketching the engine layout in his notebook. The other officers moved in with cameras and tape measures, their flashlights creating shifting pools of light across the fuselage. Holloway stood back, watching them work. Something about the aircraft unsettled him in a way the German jets never had. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was dangerous, yes, but comprehensible. This thing felt different, alien, like it had been designed by someone who started from first principles and ignored everything aviation had learned in 40 years of flight. He pulled out the photograph from his briefcase again, the one showing the Shinden in flight 3 weeks earlier. The image quality was poor, shot from nearly 2 miles away, but you could see the aircraft clearly against the pale sky. Wings forward, propeller aft, climbing at an angle that seemed physically wrong. And in the lower right corner, barely visible, was a notation written in pencil by the photo interpreter. Estimated speed, 460 miles per hour. No visible means of propulsion. That last part was crossed out and corrected, pusher prop, engine at rear. But someone had seen this aircraft in flight and for just a moment couldn't figure out how it was flying. Couldn't see the propeller, couldn't understand what they were looking at. Holloway folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back into his briefcase. Outside, truck engines rumbled to life. The sun climbed higher over Kashiwa, burning through the morning haze. In 3 days, this aircraft would be disassembled, packed into wooden crates, and loaded onto a cargo ship bound for America. But standing in that hangar, surrounded by shadows and the ghost smell of high-octane fuel, Holloway couldn't shake one thought. What else had they been building that nobody found?
September 3, 1945, Naval Air Station, Patuxent River, Maryland. The Shinden arrived in pieces, packed in 11 wooden crates marked with Japanese characters and American inventory numbers. It took engineers 6 weeks to reassemble it. Captain James Holloway watched from the observation deck as mechanics bolted the forward-swept wings back into place, their hands moving carefully around metal that still seemed to belong to a different timeline. The hangar at Patuxent River smelled of fresh paint and hydraulic fluid. Overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the aircraft's unusual silhouette, making it look even more alien against the rows of conventional American fighters parked nearby. Corsairs, Hellcats, Mustangs, all pointed the right direction, propellers in front where God and physics intended. The Shinden sat among them like a visitor from another world. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood beside Holloway, a technical manual open in her hands. She was one of only 3 people at Patuxent who could read Japanese, recruited from Naval Intelligence specifically for this evaluation. Her finger traced down a page of handwritten notes, equations scratched in the margins by engineers who would never see their creation fly again. They knew about the wing twist problem. The forward sweep creates aeroelastic divergence at high speed. The wings want to bend upward and tear themselves apart. They tried to compensate with structural reinforcement, but they ran out of time to test it properly. Holloway felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. How fast did they fly it? 320 miles per hour, maybe 350 on the final flight. Captain Saruno's notes say the airframe was rated for 460, but he never pushed it that far. Smart man. Dead man, she corrected softly. They found his body last week, harbor in Yokosuka. He tied stones to his flight suit. The hangar fell silent except for the distant clang of tools on metal. Holloway thought about the pilot who'd flown this machine 3 times, who'd felt it respond to his hands, who'd seen the future of aviation and then chosen to die rather than watch it belong to someone else. Down on the hangar floor, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb circled the Shinden one final time, checking fuel lines and control cables. Webb had 20 years of Navy aviation under his belt, had worked on everything from biplanes to the new jet prototypes arriving from Germany. But even he moved around the Shinden like it might bite. "Engine checks complete," Webb called up. "Mitsubishi Mk9D is running clean. Oil pressure nominal. All 18 cylinders firing in sequence. But sir, this pusher configuration means the prop wash hits nothing but air. No cooling effect on the engine. She's gonna run hot, real hot." Holloway descended the metal stairs to the hangar floor. The smell of aviation fuel was stronger here, mixing with the sharp tang of fresh machine oil. He walked to the cockpit and looked inside. American instruments had been installed alongside the Japanese ones. Airspeed indicator reading in miles per hour instead of kilometers. Altimeter calibrated in feet, and a new radio set for communication with the tower. But the gun triggers remained, still connected to the 4 30mm cannons in the nose, just in case. The test pilot was already suiting up in the ready room. Lieutenant David Martinez, 32 years old, 300 combat hours in Corsairs over the Pacific, volunteered for experimental aircraft evaluation because he got bored flying the same missions twice. He emerged wearing a standard flight suit and parachute, his face betraying nothing but professional focus. Martinez walked to the Shinden without hesitation. He circled it once, checking control surfaces with his hands, testing the rudder movement, examining the huge 6-bladed propeller that dominated the rear fuselage. Then he climbed into the cockpit and began strapping himself in. Chen handed him a clipboard through the open canopy. Recommended flight profile: straight and level at 5,000 feet, gentle turns only. Do not exceed 350 miles per hour. Do not perform aerobatics. If you feel any vibration in the wings, any flutter at all, you abort. Martinez scanned the checklist and signed it without comment. His hand was steady. Holloway stepped closer. "Dave, this thing has less than an hour of total flight time. The man who designed it is dead. The man who flew it is dead. The country that built it surrendered before they could finish testing. If anything feels wrong..." "I've read the reports, sir. I know what I'm doing." The canopy came down with a mechanical thunk. Martinez ran through his pre-flight checks, his movements smooth and practiced, despite sitting in a cockpit designed for a Japanese pilot 6 inches shorter. Ground crew pulled the wheel chocks. The fire truck rolled into position near the runway, just in case. Webb stepped up to the propeller with a fire extinguisher in one hand and gave a thumbs up. Martinez engaged the starter. The Mitsubishi Mk9D coughed once, twice, then roared into life with a sound like tearing metal. The 6-bladed propeller bit into the air, spinning up to full power, creating a wind blast that pushed against everyone in the hangar. Smoke curled from the engine cowling. The whole aircraft trembled, straining against the wheel brakes. Martinez released the brakes. The Shinden rolled forward, slowly at first, then faster, accelerating down the taxiway toward the runway. The sound was wrong. Propeller roar coming from behind the aircraft instead of in front, the whole machine seeming to push itself through the air backwards. Holloway raised his binoculars. The Shinden reached the runway, turned into the wind, and paused. Through the lenses, he could see Martinez in the cockpit, running final checks, hand on the throttle. Then the engine note changed, deepened. The propeller became a blur. The Shinden began its takeoff roll. It gathered speed quickly, faster than Holloway expected, the forward swept wings generating lift even at low velocity. 50 miles per hour, 70, 100. The tail lifted. The aircraft seemed to crouch, ready to spring. At 120 miles per hour, the Shinden left the ground and immediately rolled hard to the left. Martinez fought the controls, the aircraft yawing violently, one wing dropping toward the runway while the other climbed skyward. The engine screamed. Black smoke poured from the cowling. Holloway's hand clenched around the binoculars. "Pull up! Christ, Dave, pull up!" The Shinden rolled inverted.
September 3, 1945, Naval Air Station Patuxent River, Maryland. 1447 hours. Time moved like cold honey. The Shinden hung inverted, 60 feet above the runway, black smoke trailing from the engine cowling like a funeral banner. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant David Martinez fought controls that responded like they belonged to a different aircraft, a different reality. The nose dropped. Gravity took over. Holloway's voice came out as a whisper. "Eject, Dave, eject!" But there was no ejection seat, no parachute deployment system, just a canopy that needed to be manually jettisoned and a pilot who needed 3 seconds he didn't have. Martinez rolled the aircraft upright with a violent wrench of the control stick. The forward-swept wings flexed, their metal skin rippling like water. The Shinden's nose came up, up, clawing for sky instead of concrete. The propeller bit into air with a sound like 1,000 knives spinning. 50 feet, 40, 30. The wheels kissed the runway with a shriek of rubber. The Shinden bounced once, hard enough to compress the landing gear to its limits, then slammed back down. Martinez stood on the brakes. Smoke poured from the tires now too, mixing with the black exhaust from the overheating engine. The aircraft rolled to a stop 300 yards down the runway. For 5 seconds, nothing moved. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The propeller spun down, clicking as it slowed. Then the canopy flew open, and Martinez climbed out, his legs shaking so badly he nearly fell off the wing. The fire truck arrived first. Foam sprayed across the engine compartment, white chemical snow covering hot metal. Holloway ran across the tarmac, his heart hammering against his ribs. By the time he reached the aircraft, Martinez was sitting on the runway, his flight suit dark with sweat, his hands trembling. "Report," he managed to say. Martinez looked up at him with eyes that had seen something beyond routine flight testing. "Torque roll. The pusher prop creates rotational force with nothing to counteract it. The moment I lifted off, the whole aircraft tried to spin itself apart. I've never felt anything like it. It was like flying a corkscrew." Chen arrived with the technical manual, already flipping through pages. The Japanese noted asymmetric thrust characteristics. They tried to compensate with rudder trim, but at takeoff speed with full power. She found the page she wanted and stopped. Her face went pale. "There's a note here, written 2 days before surrender. They were going to install a counter-rotating propeller system. They knew the single-prop configuration was unstable. They knew." Webb was already underneath the aircraft, examining the wing roots with a flashlight. What he found made him curse softly. Stress fractures, both wings. Hairline cracks running from the fuselage attachment points. Sir, if he'd pulled any harder, if he'd tried to climb instead of level out. He didn't finish the sentence. Holloway walked slowly around the Shinden, seeing it now for what it truly was. Not a weapon, not a fighter, a prototype, an experiment. A desperate attempt by brilliant engineers to build something revolutionary with materials they didn't have, time they couldn't spare, and physics they only half understood. It was the future, yes, but a future that arrived too early, built by hands that ran out of time to make it work. The forward-swept wings that promised superior maneuverability created structural loads conventional designs never faced.
The pusher propeller that allowed concentrated nose armament generated torque forces that tried to tear the aircraft apart. The canard forewing that improved pitch control created aerodynamic interactions they'd barely begun to test. It was the future, yes, but a future that arrived too early, built by hands that ran out of time to make it work. Martinez stood up, his legs steadier now. He walked to the nose of the aircraft and placed his hand flat against the metal, just above where the 30mm cannons were mounted. Captain Tsuruno flew this 3 times. 3 times. He knew what it would do. He knew it wanted to kill him, and he flew it anyway. He was testing it for his country, Chen said quietly. They were losing the war. They needed something, anything that could stop the B-29s from burning their cities. This was supposed to be that something. Holloway thought about the photograph in his briefcase. The Shinden climbing against a pale sky, captured by a reconnaissance camera 3 weeks before Japan surrendered. Tsuruno at the controls, pushing an aircraft past its tested limits because there was no tomorrow to test it properly. Because the bombs were falling and the cities were burning, and this strange backwards fighter was the only card left to play. "What happens to it now?" Martinez asked. Holloway looked at the Shinden, foam-covered and wounded, sitting on a Maryland runway 9,000 miles from where it was born. "We document everything: measurements, performance data, failure modes. Then it goes to the Smithsonian. Let historians figure out what it means." "And what does it mean?" Chen's voice was soft. "It means they were as desperate as we were brilliant. It means they saw the same future we did, jets and rockets, and aircraft that don't look like aircraft. They just got there by a different road." Holloway pulled out the photograph one last time. The Shinden climbing against a pale sky, captured by a reconnaissance camera 3 weeks before Japan surrendered. Tsuruno at the controls, pushing an aircraft past its tested limits because there was no tomorrow to test it properly. Because the bombs were falling and the cities were burning, and this strange backwards fighter was the only card left to play. The sun began to set over Patuxent River, painting the sky the color of aviation fuel fires. Ground crew swarmed the Shinden, documenting damage, taking measurements, preparing it for its final journey to a museum. The forward-swept wings caught the light, still beautiful despite the stress fractures, still radical despite the failure. Webb approached Holloway with a small metal box. "Found this in the cockpit, tucked behind the seat cushion." Inside was a photograph, black and white, edges worn. It showed 3 men in Japanese naval uniforms standing in front of the Shinden at Kyushu Airfield. The man in the center was young, maybe 30, his expression serious but not grim. Captain Tsuruno Susumu. The 2 engineers flanking him were older, their faces lined with exhaustion and something that looked like pride. On the back, written in careful English, "Lightning, magnificent, may it protect the sky." July 1945. Holloway stared at the photograph for a long time. 3 men who believed they were building a weapon to save their country. 3 men who built something so advanced it barely worked, so radical that it defied conventional wisdom, so desperate that it could only exist in the final days of a losing war. They built it anyway. Chen closed her technical manual. Martinez climbed into the ambulance for observation, his hands finally steady. Webb supervised the ground crew as they prepared the Shinden for its final journey to a museum. And Holloway slipped the photograph into his briefcase, alongside the reconnaissance image, 2 pieces of history that told the same story from different angles. The future had arrived in 1945, assembled backwards by desperate hands. It had flown for less than 2 hours total, and then it was gone, leaving only questions about what might have been if time had not run out, if the war had lasted longer, if the engineers had solved the problems they identified but never fixed. The ghost of tomorrow, grounded forever, but not forgotten.